Hello to all of you, and welcome to this very special Wednesday Social Brussels. I've hosted quite a few of these down the years, but this is certainly the most unusual. Normally, I'm speaking to about 200 or 300 people in a very well known Belgian landmark, and I can see the whites of your eyes. Not today. We've been affected by this awful virus which has taken so many lives all over Europe and infected so many thousands of us and continues to infect so many thousands of us. It's also destroyed the economy in so many countries, if not all. And European employment is going to soar as a result of this. We're here today to discuss how best the single market is there to help in that recovery or help deal with this crisis. The single market is made up of four key freedoms, of course, goods, services, money, and people. At least one of them, freedom of movement of people, has stopped entirely to save lives. I'll be asking how the single market works if one of its key tenants has stopped working, and we have some pretty major guests to help us with this. I also want to find out is what is working and what is not working as well. And we'll get how do we get out of this mess with nearly every EU government bankrupt or at least facing huge debts in order to keep their population alive. You'll see that we have some very high caliber guests. You go to the website and you'll see those guests, Brussels hyphen WednesdaySocial.eu, Brussels hyphen WednesdaySocial.eu. We have Kerstin Jorna, the Director General of DG GROW in the European Commission. A little bit later, we're going to be joined by the MEP Eva Majdal, who is the president of the European Movement International. Representing the voice of business, we have Ivona Julita Bolo from Metro, one of the biggest wholesalers in Europe. And representing the voice of ordinance is Luca Visentini from the E2UC, or the European Trades Union Congress, representing ordinary people who are, for many purposes, on the front line of this. Before we go to our first guest, Kerstin, though, I'm going to remind you that you too can take part. If you look on the right-hand side of your screen as you're looking at it, you'll see live comments. You can post your thoughts there, and I will be able to see them and put them to our four very, very talented and clever guests, as you can see on the right-hand side there as well. You can also talk to each other using the private chat function there. Do you see the private chat function there? You can post messages to each other to start a dialogue, because that's what the Wednesday socials are all about: talking, getting to know new people, sharing ideas as well. So please get your questions ready. And as they say in Scotland, shy children get no sweets. Now, without any further ado, let's go straight to Kerstin Jorna, who is first with a brief presentation on behalf of the European Commission. Kerstin is the new Director General at DG GROW, which is one of the most important directorates in the Commission, working with employers and job creators in Europe. Kerstin, guten Tag. Firstly, I hope your family is safe and well and that you are healthy. My question to you is, what is working and what is not working in the single market currently, and what role does the EU play? For your first presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for having me. I'd like to add a third thing to your two questions, which is what had to be invented. So what works, what did not work, what works, and what had to be invented. What did not work was the fast reflex when this crisis came. It was a guts reflex, close the borders. And that caused a lot of problems. I will remember the 18th March when hundreds and hundreds of people could not actually travel back to their countries. They were stuck at the borders. I also remember 20 hours of trucks waiting at borders. More than half of our member states actually introduced such border restrictions. Either they closed the borders or they had export bans for products like masks that were desperately needed in some countries. Today there are still 9 member states where we have discussions about how useful this is, but we also resolved 14. So what worked? What worked, as I said, is the Commission as a door opener. We had discussions with the member states, and We also made the point about the goods needing to flow and the medical equipment that was really needed to go where it was really needed, because the crisis hit European countries in a staggered time way. We also worked around liquidity, because what we saw is that companies that can no longer sell, they have no longer any revenues, but they have rents to pay, they have wages to pay. And so to sustain the liquidity, our temporary state aid framework allowed now for a total of 46 state aid schemes that member states can use. As we speak, something like 60% of GDP has been added to the economy in terms of liquidity, and 3% of GDP in terms of stimulus to help companies. Also, vaccines, we brought together, based with EU funding, 155 companies to collaborate and work on finding the vaccines that we need to stem this epidemic. And it builds on the research networks that we have built across Europe over years under the Horizon 2020 program. And then we also just launched our 4th joint procurement. If member states procure for the same ventilators and masks and hunt the same for the same devices, then that's not very efficient. So we have a joint procurement and for all the member states, which is done on behalf of the Commission. That's what worked. What had to be invented? What had to be invented is, for example, the clearinghouse, which is attached in the Commission in the Secretariat General, and which looks at matching demand and supply, because we have a lot of supply in Europe, but not always does it get to the places where it is most needed. We're working with member states, with hospitals now, to make sure that we match demand and supply. Another role for the clearinghouse is to organize financing when one member state's hospitals actually help to take people who are very sick from a member state where the hospital no longer can deal with the inflow. This is the type of thing that the clearinghouse does, and it's a very unbureaucratic platform and convening hub for member states to interact and authorities to interact. Second thing we had to invent is SURE. SURE is a safety net for national unemployment schemes. In the course of the crisis, we've seen that all member states introduced temporary non-employment work schemes. We only had more or less half of member states who had something like that for short-term unemployment. Now all member states have it, and our proposal SURE aims at supporting the national systems in case there's so much demand that they cannot deal with that. Third thing we had to invent is standards for free. Now, that seems very technical, but actually what we are trying to help is the production of masks and ventilators. We have too little in Europe, and we had to ignite the production. But then some production chains, including with car or textile, they were standing idle because there was no possibility to produce for selling. And here we offered the standards, the industrial standards for masks, for example, for free. And we worked with a number of textile companies that are now producing the masks and helping to replenish the supplies as we need them. These were 3 things I'd like to mention and highlight that we also invented during the crisis. And it's all around the single market, and with single market, not as a problem, but as the solution, part of the solution.
Kerstin, thank you so much for that. I am sure we will be coming back to those very interesting things that you invented over the last month, which can't have been easy to do something at that speed. I'm going to turn now to Ivana Yolita Bolo, who is with Metro, one of the largest wholesalers in the world, certainly one of the largest in Europe. She has worked for Metro for 7 years and has previously headed International Relations Unit. Prior to that, she worked for the German Parliament and the Federal Foreign Office. Ivana studied political science in Hamburg. Ivana, guten Tag also. Before you give us your thoughts, remind you to post your questions on the right-hand side. We have 1 or 2 already on that side. Ivana, what has been Metro's experience during this crisis, and what do companies need to do to continue to perform their role?
Okay, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be part of this Wednesday Social's first online session. Hope that also from a technical perspective. To start, COVID-19 and especially the respective state measures in order to prevent the spread of the virus impacted Metro in many ways: sourcing, assortment, logistics, operations, including hygiene and social distancing measures. Kirsten was just talking about the face mask. All this happened on the one hand, and all these measures had been needed to be implemented in a very, very quick way, and quite often not only on a national level, but actually also on a local level. So the whole situation created a huge complexity, and the colleagues in the stores, but also those who kept or still keeping, of course, the supply chains behind the stores alive, they did an amazing job. On the other hand, when I talk about the impact of on Metro, there's an impact on our customers. You mentioned that we are a wholesaler. That means our customers are professional customers, and we're talking here mainly about the HoReCa customers, hotels, restaurants, and caterers. And I guess you can all imagine right now, you know about the situation of the HoReCa sector. The sector has been locked down for weeks already throughout the European Union, and this impact, of course, hits also us. But talking first about the operations, so first of all, what I would say the major impact actually concerns one of the most important veins of the single market, the open borders. And you all mentioned already, closed borders have become a reality, although, of course, for business, there is still a possibility, of course, of transporting goods. But nevertheless, there had been bottlenecks, and coordination among the member states within the European Union has become extremely essential in order to keep our supply chains alive. So first of all, getting goods across, but do that also in a short way in order to prevent things from expiring and so on. That was extremely crucial, especially when it comes to the panic buying. So supply chains, functioning supply chains, a good border regime was essential to somehow keep or fill the gap in the shelves. And you all have seen that there were some empty spaces within the shelves, you know, the pictures about lacking toilet paper and so on. That was, of course, a consequence of panic buying, which came on top of all the challenges that retailers and wholesalers were facing as soon as the crisis started. But I would like to mention 2-3 other aspects. What we experienced, that what was very interesting for us was how the governments were reacting to this crisis. And at the moment, you can really see how that the European Union consists of a couple of extremely different member states when it comes to the prevention measures on the one hand and the exit discussions on the others. We experience from time to time that one country's decision also inspires the discussion in another country, but in general, the situation is totally diverse and absolutely unpredictable, which makes it very difficult for business to prepare for what is coming next in that regard. And therefore, a coordinated approach when it comes to the exit strategy, is now proposed also by the Commission, is extremely important to keep or help businesses to perform in this very difficult time. What we also experience is a kind of misuse of the situation. So suddenly, old legislative initiatives which haven't made their way in the past somehow celebrate a little comeback right now under the umbrella of COVID-19 measures. So this is something I believe the EU Commission really needs to watch out and stay strong. And then finally, I would like to say something again about our customers, the HoReCa sector. So the lockdown is a problem right now for the HoReCa sector and the industry behind. It's a huge industry behind the HoReCa sector itself, including, of course, wholesale, but the problem is much bigger. So many of these HoReCa businesses, and the majority of them being small businesses, won't make it through the crisis if the lockdown stays much longer right now. So they need massive financial support, and this is not only an economic challenge and a work workplace challenge, this is also a huge challenge for our European culture and the quality of life that we are having here. And I see here a major role for the EU to step in. And so to conclude, the single market as a road to recovery works when it's a single market which is working for the people and their businesses. And a clear exit strategy driven by the Commission gives a kind of perspective, but the Commission needs to stay strong in restoring our 4 freedoms and creating also an economic basis and trust among consumers as a precondition to actually make use of the freedoms we have. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Ivana, thank you very much. Before I turn to Luca, just for my own benefit, what is the HoReCa sector? Does that stand for?
Sorry. The HoReCa sector, I thought I said it at the beginning. HoReCa stands for hotels, restaurants, and caterers.
Hotels, restaurants, and caterers. Okay, I was an idiot and I had missed some whole sector there.
I guess.
But I probably wasn't an idiot, and you probably said it. Thank you so much. Now, I've just seen out of the corner of my eye Eva Mydell joining us. I don't know whether she's technically ready to say a few words, or would you rather me go to Luca? Eva, are you ready to chat? You are. Brilliant.
I'm ready, but perhaps it would be more fair to have Luca and then followed by me, because I just managed to exit the technical room. So I would like to hear at least one of the speakers before I speak.
I think that's fair enough. While she gets her breath, Luca, can I turn to you, please? Luca Visentini is the General Secretary of the European Trades Union Congress, or the ETUC. Luca regularly holds very important meetings with EU and national leaders, and has been in the trade union movement since 1989, and is now representing frontline workers who are literally putting their lives at risk to help the wider society. Before you give us your thoughts, Luca, I want, on behalf of everyone here, to express our support for the people of Italy. Italy has been the worst affected country with the most deaths, and it is breaking all our hearts to see what's going on, not just in Italy, but of course, Italy has been especially affected. So on behalf of everyone here, I would say, Ti amo Italia, forza Italia. Luca, Europe's workers are at the forefront of this crisis, either because of redundancies or furloughing, or because they are working in frontline roles like hospitals and supermarkets. What more needs to be done to protect jobs and shore up the economy?
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and discuss with these very important topics. Indeed, there are, I would say, 2 categories of workers we are trying to take care of at the moment. On the one side, those that are still working, particularly the frontliners, those that are working in the healthcare sector, that are dealing with the virus and with people's lives every day. There is a need for all for them, because we come out from a decade of austerity measures and cuts that have affected public health care very, very hugely. And so there is a need for massive investment for providing workers and the services with equipment, protection, staff, and so on and so forth. This is our first concern, of course, because these people are really the heroes of this crisis, but at the same time, they are also exposed to all risks more than any other person in Europe at the moment. The second problem is, of course, for those workers that have been suspended from work, that cannot work at all, or that have seen their working time usually reduced because of the outbreak and the lockdown that is happening in all the European countries. We are trying to see, together with our affiliates at the national level, what can be done to prevent these people to fall under finally completely permanent unemployment. This risk is very high. Our statistics tell us that at the moment there are more or less 40 million workers affected either by permanent unemployment or temporary unemployment in the European Union. And the risk is that this figure will go up to 60 million, maybe more workers affected by the effects of the crisis. It's absolutely necessary to make this system Kerstin was referring to for employment support, to avoid that people go into unemployment, really operational in all the European countries. There are still loopholes and gaps in this respect. This extraordinary measure that has been proposed by the European Commission and the Eurogroup, the so-called SURE, this system to help unemployment protection systems at the national level has to be put in place and made operational as soon as possible. Unfortunately, it's not yet the case, so there is really a rush to be made, for these measures to be really operational. This is the emergency, but then we have also other two problems. The first one is the exit strategy. When this will come, it's very important that it's fully coordinated among member states, that the European Union takes the lead in this respect, that precautionary measures are put in place fully, but it's also very important that the health and safety dimension at work is really protected, because otherwise it will be impossible for workers to come back to their jobs in a safe and secure environment. And finally, we need to think already now about a possible path for recovery, because the risk of having a recession and unemployment levels that will be 5 times bigger than the ones that we have seen after the financial crisis in the previous decade is very high. So it's also in this case very important that the leaders of the European Union find an agreement as soon as possible on how to finance and how to deploy a really effective and ambitious recovery plan. We see a lot of divisions, a lot of clashes and discussions among member states in Council. We hope really that particularly the meeting tomorrow of the European Council will give a push, a positive push, I would say, for an ambitious recovery plan. There is a last dimension I would like to mention, and is the fact that all these, from a trade union, but also I will say social partners perspective, cannot happen in an effective way. All these measures cannot be deployed in an effective way to protect companies and workers from the worst effect of the crisis if we don't put in place proper social dialogue. You know, it's very important to involve the stakeholders and social partners in the economy and in the labor market to make sure that these measures can really work. We are the ones that represent businesses and workers. We need to be involved. We need to be really on board in making sure that these measures can really deploy the maximum protection as possible for all the people that are affected by this emergency. We have seen many member states behaving positively in this respect by involving social partners very effectively, but this is not the case for all. There are also some member states, I don't want to blame and shame, but some member states where, on the contrary, let's say the emergency has been misused to eliminate democratic rules and rights on the ground and to smash down completely social dialogue, collective bargaining, industrial relations and workers' protections and rights in many, many companies and regions. So this is also an appeal for these countries to change and to come back to the real spirit of the European project, that is solidarity and dialogue.
Grazie, Luca. Thank you very much for that. And we will, of course, be coming back to some of those incredibly important issues in due course. Let me go back now to Eva Meidel, MEP, who is hopefully with us. She is with the EPP group and a member of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, as well as the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. She's the Vice Chair of the Delegation for Relations with Japan and a substitute member of the Delegation for Relations with the USA, which must be very interesting these days. Eva's key areas of interest include innovation, digitalization, investments, SMEs, and entrepreneurship and education. That's got quite a few interests there. Eva, why is a common EU response to the crisis so important for both businesses and citizens?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to join. Speaking of opportunities, I think very often we refer to situations such as the current one, despite it being also very unprecedented for our generation, as a moment where we could see also some positives, reforms, or topics to be dealt with. But the crisis is also an opportunity. Said like this could sound also as a cliche. So in order for it not to remain a cliche, I think we need to make sure that we intellectually challenge the current realities that we are finding ourselves right now. When we say that the European Union has to come up with a common response, I think we need to think a little bit bigger, and we need to actually think what the great European idea was about. It was not a vague thing. It was a very concrete, real, tangible one. If you track the production of steel, It resulted in fewer weapons being built, fewer wars being started. People were living peacefully, and slowly prosperity was able to be built. I think today we need this kind of answers when we speak about the European response. And from what I've heard, some of those questions were put from the previous speakers on the table. How do we save small businesses in countries across Europe, Italy, Spain, but not only, so that they can save their livelihood and way of life? Because the measures that we need to take for us to restart the economy have to be very targeted. So we need to have a response that, as the crisis has struck us symmetrically, it has created asymmetrical consequences for our economy. So I believe our responses should be also asymmetrically tailored. One thing I think that's very important that we saw during this crisis is the importance of the single market as an enabler for growth that has been for many years until now. It is one of the biggest European achievements that makes us more united as a society, businesses, and as even in politics, if one would say. We saw the effects of a disrupted single market. And what we need to do to help have a stronger European response is especially making sure that we strengthen the single market. We saw the positives in terms of the green corridor, in terms of the way data to be shared, the interoperability between systems, the infrastructure for remote working and learning, and some of those things are there and they're working, and others are not so well working at the moment, and we can see how much more we need to excel in order to have one of the biggest successes of Europe, the single market, being disruptive. I will finish with a sentence. I think indeed a common European response is needed because we need to reach everyone in Europe that needs the support. The European solidarity will not be, however, judged by the amount of masks that are sent to one country or another. It will be judged by the people that could rebuild their lives when the economy is revitalized. And if we do not have companies, businesses, workers being able to start and continue on what they've been working and building, it would be very difficult to build credibility in the European project. So it's not just about actions that we take from one country to another. It's a great example and it's working, and we can see solidarity in action. But what would really help the people is this tailor-made responses that could actually save their lives, their opportunities. Thank you.
Eva, thank you very much for that. Your line wasn't great, I'll be very honest. There was a lot of breakup, so we missed some of what you said. I did my best to decipher what you said, but we may need to come back to some of those issues. Just to remind you all that you can offer your comments on the live comments thing. Please tell us who you work for if you want to, and your name, so that I can make reference to your questions, which we come to in due course. Can I go back to Kirsten Jorna from the European DG Grow? Ivana from Metro said that the European Commission needs to be strong. Now, what she's talking about, I presume, it needs to stand up to the member states. How do they do that, Kirsten? No, unfortunately,
we work together. I mean, member states, after the first round of border closures, they realized that's not workable, and it's even hurting themselves because it backfires. You know, you may close today your border for equipment, and you stockpile what you have, but then may come the crisis and you will need much more than you've been able to stockpile, and then you cannot actually ask other member states to come and help you. Same about hospitals. So after the first initial request, which probably was also in the confusion of the action, now member states have understood how important it is to work together and to see this through together. And I want to mention another work stream that we're having, because we are not only looking at the exit strategy at the member states, we're looking also at the ecosystems in our economy, like tourism, like mobility, and like retail. And we are trying to talk to the different actors in these ecosystems, which may be the big retailers, the small retailers, the wholesalers, the suppliers when it comes to retail, and to see how they together see the situation, because these ecosystems, they stretch across many countries. You can imagine it like a big river system, you know, it has small rivers, bigger rivers, and it goes across the whole continent. And we are talking to them. We're trying to have a coordinated response, because it doesn't make sense to open a car factory in one country, but then all the elements for this car come from other countries somewhere else, and there has to be some coordination. And what we observe as well, Commissioner Breton has many calls with the stakeholders in the ecosystem, is we observe that there's also a lot of solidarity inside the ecosystem. For example, a number of platforms actually help traders to understand what it would take to trade via internet. Then there are courses, free courses, you know, how to manage the crisis. Then there's also financial support being given, and there's a lot going on in the ecosystems. And also when it comes to the protection of workers, you need to have the same protocol inside such an ecosystem of who goes back to the workplace, under which conditions, and how that works. And there's a lot of conversations going on, which we are trying to capture, and which will help us to also stand up to the member states, because, you know, it's the economy, it's the real economy that tells us how much we have to work together, and where they would also need European help, borders obviously, but also financially and regulatory. So there's a very good conversation going on, and I think we've moved out of the standing our ground vis-a-vis the member states. We're really moving into a joint and collaborative approach to take us out of this crisis, and to bounce forward, not only rebound, but bounce forward in all our ecosystems, to recovery, where values such as green or digital or resilient will play a very prominent role. And therefore the Commission has to play its role, and it's not only about confrontation, it's very much about collaboration, and we've been the convening hub for that, and we are increasingly.
Okay, Kirsten, thank you very much for that. Luca, can I come back to you, please? You mentioned your wish list and organizing the exit strategy and a path for recovery and a social dialogue. I just wonder whether you're worried that in a year or maybe two, the people will have forgotten the risks that your members will have taken in this crisis. They will have forgotten the supermarket workers who risked their lives to make sure that you had fresh fruit and vegetables, and they might have forgotten the work from nurses and junior doctors. Is that a risk when everybody's focusing on getting their economy back sorted and getting the single market working again, that people will forget the effort from ordinary workers? Luca.
Yeah, these risks absolutely exist. We have, two risks at the moment we are facing. The first one is immediate, and is the fact that we are, let's say, breaking the European Union apart if we don't show solidarity during the emergency, and we don't put in place measures that can really help working people, businesses, and citizens, to go through this emergency. But then there is a second risk in the second step, let's say, a second stage. This is exactly what you say, that people will forget, and there will be, let's say, the tendency to come back to business as usual. And even to instrumentalize to some extent the emergency, to start saying, now we need to build the recovery, we need to go to the core, to the essential, and so we don't need to confirm that we need a Green Deal, that we need an European pillar of social rights, that we need sustainability. All the old discussions regarding how to transform our economic and social model to make it more sustainable will be forgotten completely, and there will be a clear trend to come back to business as usual and to forget all those that have really faced in the forefront this emergency. That's why, also going back to some of the questions that we are seeing on the screen, I think one of the key words, together with dialogue, that I was emphasizing before, is absolutely sustainability. So we need to exploit this emergency to try to build up a more united and more sustainable Europe. This is really key in our reflection, in our action, to be remembered. And sustainability means, many things, because it's, of course, the environment, the protection of the environment, not to drop any of the ambitious demands that we have put at the core of the Green Deal, the just transition approach, etc. But it's also social sustainability. It's also the fact some of the interventors were saying, it should be also the health dimension, the well-being dimension to be considered in this different and new sustainable model we have to put in place. So there are many things that should be considered, including the equality dimension, because we have seen during the financial crisis inequalities exploding really hugely in many sectors, in many ambits. Now there is really the need to come back to a more sustainable equality approach, also because those that have suffered most from the crisis are, of course, the workers on the forefront, those that have become unemployed, small and medium enterprises that have been completely thrown out from the markets because of the lockdown, but also elderly people, and also disadvantaged and vulnerable categories that have been affected, like mobile workers, migrants, people at the margin of the society, people in precarious conditions. If we want really to build up a stronger, more united and more resilient Europe, we need really to take everybody on board, to share, to have solidarity, to have dialogue, but also to have sustainability at the core of our strategies, and not to forget about what's going on now.
Yeah, some very.
That's why I think the concept should be bouncing forward rather than only bouncing back.
Yeah.
And this forward will be clearly formatted by the transformational experience that we're all doing. I mean, we all see in our neighborhood a completely new way of solidarity and of people helping each other, caring about each other. I see it in the discussions that the commissioner has with the ecosystems, the different ecosystems. All the time, there's a real experience that nobody can do it on their own. We have to do this together, and we have to be better in the future. So, and that's why the Commission will propose a new MFF proposal, and it's looking also at our work program to make this to use the momentum of this experience to improve it.
Okay, I'm going to go to some of the questions that you guys have put in there. One question that was posed from Darren Ennis from Healthy Europe about seeing the health and well-being emerge from this. And I think, Luca, you've already dealt with that. It's not just the economic health and well-being, it's your mental health. How will it come? How will it emerge after this crisis? So I'm not asked that particular question, but I just want you to say that you've already touched on one of the questions from people taking part on this Wednesday social webcast. I'm going to ask a question now to Ivona, if I may, from Ralph Kampfhörner, who is with the Confederation of German Textile and Fashion Industry. His question, Ivona, for you is, how big do you see the damage caused by closures and checks at the intra-Schengen borders, both for the internal market and for the European project as a whole? Ivona, did you hear that question?
Difficult.
Do we have Ivana?
I heard that question, but I actually have a bit of technical problems. Can you give me a sign whether you... Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Ivana, I'm going to repeat that question for you very briefly. And if we don't hear from you, I'll pass it over to Eva Meidel, if I may. It's from Ralph Kampfner from the German Confederation of Textile Industries. How big do you see the damage caused by closures and checks at the intra-Schengen borders, both for the internal market and for the European project as a whole? Did you hear that, Ivana? No, unfortunately, her line's very bad. Eva, did you hear that question?
I did.
Could you tackle it?
Do you understand me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Eva. Unfortunately, Ivana, we can't hear your line. Go ahead, Eva.
Okay, so I don't think I can give you the numbers. That's probably something that the Commission is analyzing. However, two things when it comes to the way border crossings have been dealt with in the past month and a half. I think by establishing the green corridors, it has been a big green tick box for the Commission, making sure that we have a system that is visible 24/7 online and being able to check if there's any interruption on the border crossing. So we have seen the very good collaboration established. What I think we need to have is perhaps this mechanism through some way reinforced, maybe monitored by the service we have in the Commission that deals with crisis response in the long term, maybe enabling better in the long term, because we have seen the importance of having this green corridors development. I'm sure the data will be crucial also to answer one of the questions that I saw being posed, which is related to which are the losers in terms of in economic terms and which will be the winners. And I think these are some of the key questions that businesses are asking themselves, and also different sectors that are trying to find ways of how to best reorient perhaps their production lines and so on. And this would be key for the bouncing forward of the European economy. It would be very important that in order to keep those workers, to keep their employment and to have businesses that are going to also be able to bounce back, to actually invest the recovery funds, a part of them, in sustainable projects, in projects that were not the same type of projects we invested 5, 10, or 15 years ago, or the previous crisis. We need to allocate good ideas and projects, part of the MFF as well, that will be able to help bounce forward. I know it's a popular expression right now in the country. I think it's a good expression if it's filled with concrete ideas and suggestions that could be taken on board by institutions, but also by businesses and societies as a whole.
Eva, thank you very much. We appear to have lost Ivana briefly, but we'll try and get her back. Can I go back to Kirsten with a question from Malcolm Harbour, who I think is the former...
Hello, Malcolm.
Malcolm Harbour. And his question is, can the procurement innovation and flexibility that we've seen under the existing rules be a model to boost innovative procurement after this crisis? Kirsten.
What's key is investment after this crisis, and investment in green resilience and in digitization. And that investment can come from public sources, and that's why the public procurement framework applies, and it can come from private sources, and what's more important, it can come from collaboration, what we are doing under the Juncker Plan and InvestEU in the future, where you have private money coming in doing public good. When the public is involved and you have public procurement, the public procurement directives give a very broad range and allow for member states to and for authorities to actually go for the green or the innovative, and we are helping member states actually to improve their capacity to work on this, and we are also helping member states through the support service, to train their managing authorities to use these rules in the best way, in the most convenient manner. And it's a key issue because at the moment, as you know, what we adopted is that now all the remaining money under the structural and cohesion funds can be spent, and member states can decide to use this for alleviating the situation around the corona, the COVID-19 epidemic, and they can use this money, and we stand ready to help member states to do this in the most efficient and fluent manner.
Ivona, are you there? Yes. Wow, we have her. Great. Fantastic.
Oh, very good. Sorry.
We're having a few technical gremlins there.
I got completely lost.
We've all seen those pictures of queues at the Polish border. And that border was closed without EU consultation. Doesn't that create a major problem for you as one of Europe's largest wholesalers about moving products around the single market? And what kind of pressure can you put on the Polish government via the single market or the institutions to get those things open, to get borders open? Ivona.
Unfortunately, I cannot really hear you. I see you're speaking, but I didn't really get what you were saying. There were somehow technical interruptions all the time. Ask the question to somebody else.
All right. Okay. Well, Luca, can I ask you a question? We've already heard that it's important for workers to keep their jobs. It's more important than preventing jobs being lost overall. Is it more important to keep people in work or to try to keep the companies alive?
Yeah, this is exactly the dilemma we are facing at the moment, because of course there is a lockdown. So this means that 70% of the companies are closed at the moment. And this means that the workers that are employed in these companies are also without their job. Really, the emergency, the most important priority now is to make sure that these companies can survive the lockdown and that their workers can retain their job during this transition, let's say, in a way that when the things will gradually come back to normality, we will have still the companies in place, back on track in the economy, and those workers can be, let's say, reinstated, re-included in their jobs. Otherwise, I mean, if we don't look at that now with the emergency measures, supporting at the same time, financially speaking, companies and also employment support systems in the different countries, what we are going to face then in few months will be a total disaster. Because if you kill million companies, if you destroy 10 million jobs, there is no chance then for any recovery plan, even the most ambitious, with a lot of money available, to remedy a situation like this. That's why really keeping the companies alive and keeping people in their jobs, although suspended, is really the absolutely top priority for the moment to save our economy and to avoid the massive recession and massive unemployment in the future. That's why we insist so much about the fact that these emergency measures that have been launched by the Eurogroup and then now are going to be discussed in Council, you know, they are coming already late. It's really necessary to deploy these measures as soon as possible to make sure that this money is available for member states, for national systems, for national businesses and workers. It's really a matter of life or death, I would say, for our economy and our labor market. So it's really important that the politicians take the responsibility to act as soon as possible, I would say.
Luca, you are
may I one point on this?
I'll come back to you in 2 seconds, Kirsten. While I have Luca there, you're in Italy. We have seen a notable north-south divide in this crisis. Many Italians feel very annoyed with the treatment that they have got from Northern European countries. Are we risking now a major north-south divide because so many lives have been lost in this crisis?
Well, this risk unfortunately exists. it exists in Italy. If you look at the statistics and some polls that have been delivered recently, well, the anti-European sentiments in Italy have got to 2/3 of the population at the moment. 65-67% of the population are unhappy with the European Union. This was not the case until a few years ago, where in Italy you were facing one of the highest rates of support for the European project, the European Union, etc. So this comes from two big crises that Italy has faced in the recent past. The first one was about migration, of course, and refugees coming from through the Mediterranean Sea to the Italian sea borders. And now we have Italy, that is the most hit country by the COVID emergency. This discussion about solidarity and responsibility, you know, is an endless discussion in the European Union. There are different cultures, even from different religious background to some extent. We are back centuries in the past. I mean, in this sense, there are really different approaches, different mentalities, different cultures in place. But we really need all of us to make an effort to go over all this and to try to build really unity, solidarity, and dialogue. Otherwise, there will be no chance, I mean, to overcome this crisis. Someone has said it's no more an asymmetric shock as we faced during the financial crisis. This is very symmetric. You know, the virus goes to everybody. Whatever is the country, whatever is the border in the middle. I mean, and regardless of all these blockages that exist between countries. So it's really important that we prevent these anti-European sentiments, these populistic and very often even racist and nationalistic movements from rising too much. I mean, it's really important to build on the European project of solidarity and dialogue. That's why
Thank you, Luca.
with
you.
immediate response is very important, I think. Yeah.
I'm going to go to Eva Majdel. Eva, you're from Bulgaria. It's not just north-south, this divide that we've seen thanks to the coronavirus. It's also east-west. When Hungary basically shut down politics as we know it, no Eastern European Union country wrote or signed the letter that was written to the European Council urging prompt action on that issue. Is there an east-west divide as well as a north-south divide?
Well, I think in times of crisis, we often see all the various divides. One could call them center and periphery, south, and north countries, or Eastern European countries, and the rest of the countries or newer member states. First of all, on what you said, I don't think it's true. I think actually Bulgaria did sign the letter, but what does it matter who signed the letter when actually Hungary itself signed the letter? If you're referring to the same letter that I think you're referring.
No, but the letter that I'm referring to was signed only by Western European countries.
I know only of one letter, but I don't think the issue here is the letter, actually. I think the point here is the way Europe is perceived and the way rules and regulations are perceived and the way democracy and human rights are perceived and the way of what each and every country thinks the European Union is for themselves. I often happen to say in various discussions that very often leaders come and negotiate to Brussels, and then they go back, and if there is a success, they always show it as their own country success, but not as a European success. And if there's anything to be blamed, is blamed on Brussels. And actually now, Brussels has responded with some of the most serious concrete measures on the table. And some countries are reluctant to use those measures for one reason or another. Others want more, but very often they don't sit on the table for solutions in the past or even now. So I think the debate of what sort of Europe we want is, of course, back on the table. And it's a different type of European Union, the different member states with their own national specificalities would like to see. But I think what's really important right now, as I said earlier, is not about blaming and shaming one member state or another or the European Union, about finding how to collaborate together. It's about how all together we could find a response to that crisis. It's about trying to unite on certain topics and issues, also seeing where the loopholes of the systems are. Some of those countries that have been very vocal against the response of the European Union were those same countries that in the past years were not willing to contribute to common solutions and answers. And this has to be brought to the table by someone. And we need to have an honest discussion in this respect, because the topics are only going to be more and more difficult in the next few months and years to come about the decisions taken. So if we always just put a national hat and do not think about what would be beneficial for the single market, for example, because it would benefit my own country, but also that of my neighbor, it would be very difficult to reach a consensus on important topics. And one of those will be the MFF, of course.
Yes. I was going to go back to Ivana, but she seems to have disappeared again. I'm going to ask a question of all of you. Is this a time of great peril for the future of the European Union? President Macron said it was, Angela Merkel said it was. Do you agree that this is one of the biggest threats, if not the biggest threat, that the European Union has ever faced? Kerstin.
I would say it is a situation of peril, but it's also a situation, like Eva said, that holds a lot of opportunities. And one thing I think everybody learned in this crisis is alone you can't stem it. Alone you're alone. So that is a new experience, and I hope that that experience will translate through to the debates on the budget for the next 7 years that are about to come. But I do think we've made a new experience of why it's important to be together.
Okay, Ivana, at the risk of failing again, can you hear me? Unfortunately, we don't have any joy with Ivana at all today. Luca, quick question for you, and I'd ask you to be brief because I'm conscious of time. Is there a danger that the climate change goals, which are at the top of the agenda for the European Commission, that they will be diluted or abandoned now that we have this crisis, so many tens of thousands of deaths in Europe?
Yeah, I think this risk is absolutely real. As I said before, the risk when we will get out from the emergency is that many people, many forces will try to suggest that we have to come back to business as usual and to concentrate on the core issues. And this will be a total mistake. Because I agree with Kerstin, this is really probably the hugest challenge that Europe is facing after the Second World War. But we are exactly in the same situation we were in the 50s, that if we want to react and reconstruct, we have to stand united and we have to be ambitious. And, climate change is a challenge we cannot ignore. So it's really important, that we don't look back at the past, but we look at the future and we build sustainability and inclusion. I think this is really crucial.
Eva Meidel, is this the biggest challenge? And will the green goals be diluted?
It is definitely the biggest challenge that my generation has faced until that current moment. And I think it's kind of a reality check for all of us. It's time to kind of get grounded and make sure that our priorities and topics that we discuss with one another are actually solving real problems and issues. We sometimes do live in a bubble in Brussels. We often debated, a few months ago, what should be the names of portfolios of commissioners rather than actually working on the concrete, substance of those portfolios and finding solutions. So I think it's time for us to actually grasp the real problems on the ground. And I know as MEPs, we are almost weekly, a couple of days a week within constituents. And we could see so many of these issues. And sometimes the debates are really far apart from the needs of citizens. And I think a moment like this truly shows what's important, because first and foremost, in a way, it's also a humanitarian crisis that we are facing today. It's people that want to be healthy and safe. And it's, if we sometimes see it from this prism, sometimes the decisions that we need to take when we have to find a difficult compromise might be a bit easier to reach it if we do understand it and if we do see it from the real problems from the ground of citizens, of employers, employees, and so on and so forth. So yes, indeed, it's a big crisis. But if it grounds us and if it provides the right solutions, it could be extremely beneficial for Europe. And I'll wrap it up that the projects we need to invest have to be with long-term goals for sustainability related to clean tech, enabling technological development, making sure that we have a good employment rate, and leading to societies that simply live happy, healthy, and secure. That's the simple things citizens want from us. So we should be able to unite and find ways and pathways to secure that.
I started with Kirsten Jorna from the European Commission, and I'm going to finish with her as well with this question. Will the single market exist in its current form in 5 years' time?
It will be better in 5 years' time.
If only all my answers were that short. That's great. Can I thank you all for your time this afternoon? You've been incredibly helpful. We've learned a lot. This is technologically challenging. It's difficult to stare into a laptop rather than look into someone's face. We had major technical efforts, unfortunately, from Metro. But I would like to thank her for her time and her effort. I would like to thank Luca Visentini from the ETUC. I'd like to thank Eva MEP for joining us. And finally, to Kirsten Jorna, the Director General of DG Grow. You can watch this webcast again on the Forum Europe website, on the European Movement International website, and on the website that I gave you at the very start, Brussels-WednesdaySocial.eu. From me, Joe Lynham, please, everyone, stay safe, stay at home, and maybe we'll see you all again in real life soon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.